TIAN X Science is where science meets the unknown. And my name's TIAN. I'm from China.
What if the Sahara is not at all what you thought it was? You might think it is just a dead sea of sand, a place with absolutely nothing but extreme heat, fierce winds, and slowly moving sand dunes. Then, how do we explain the fossils of sea monsters with actual hind legs lying right on the desert surface, thousands of miles away from the nearest ocean? Or what about astronomical stone circles that predate Stonehenge by millennia? Or natural glass formations that require temperatures close to a meteorite impact to form? Yet the impact crater that should have been left behind has never been found. And finally, there is a massive structure about 50 kilometers in diameter, whose resemblance to descriptions of Atlantis is so striking that it is hard to simply dismiss as a coincidence. Today, we are going to look at 7 locations in the Sahara, 7 real places, 7 sites profound enough to shatter our traditional understanding of history. As the exploration deepens, you will find it increasingly difficult to simply brush these things off as a few unrelated coincidences. People are used to viewing the Sahara as an endpoint, the endpoint of water, the endpoint of life, and the endpoint of civilization. Since our student days, we have had this map etched in our minds. Northern Africa features a massive yellow region stretching between the Mediterranean Sea and the equator, appearing as a giant blank void. But this perception is inaccurate. The Sahara is not an endpoint. It acts more like a lid. Beneath this layer of sand lie far too many unsettling traces. Beneath today's yellow sands, a lush and humid world once existed. There were lakes, rivers, large fauna, settlements, stone architectural complexes, and possibly even complete cultural traditions. Today, all that is left for us are scattered fragments. Over the past few decades, archaeology, geology, paleontology, and satellite remote sensing technologies have continuously unearthed new evidence from beneath this sandy veil. Viewed in isolation, these findings might just be major discoveries within a specific academic field. But when put together, things start to look very different. The Sahara no longer seems like just a desert. It begins to resemble the largest unopened archive on Earth. The most unsettling part of this whole story is that most of what we will discuss next are verified, documented, and confirmed facts. This is not a compilation of myths, nor is it a set of unverified urban legends. We have World Heritage Sites, geological anomaly records, years of continuous archaeological excavations, field expeditions, and satellite imagery data. The problem has never been a lack of evidence. The problem is that once this evidence is pieced together, it does not align with our familiar historical narrative. Science can certainly explain these locations individually, but when they appear all at once, our familiar historical narrative begins to show cracks. So let us start right under our feet, with things that simply should not be here. On a plateau about 200 kilometers southwest of Cairo, Egypt, if no one told you what you were about to see, your brain would likely refuse to believe the image before your eyes. Scattered across the desert surface are massive dark bones. Long spines and enormous mandibles are not in a museum, not in a display case, and not even in an active archaeological excavation trench. They are lying directly on the ground. 1 skeleton, 2 skeletons, 3 skeletons. Until a certain moment, you suddenly realize that this is not an accidental discovery at all. This is an entire graveyard, a whale graveyard located right in the center of the desert. This is Wadi al-Hitan, or Whale Valley, one of the most important paleontological sites in the world, inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2005. Archaeologists have discovered hundreds of ancient whale skeletons here, dating back approximately 45 million years. The most famous among them are the Basilosaurus and the Dorudon. Reaching lengths of up to 18 meters, the Basilosaurus was an apex predator at the top of the marine food chain of its era. It hunted large fish and possibly even preyed on juvenile Dorudons. But even more important than its size was its anatomical structure. The Basilosaurus possessed true hind limbs. These were not decorative vestigial structures, nor were they vague evolutionary traces. They were complete hind legs with femurs, knee joints, and toes. This was a creature that had adapted to marine life, but had not yet completely bid farewell to the land. And this is precisely the greatest scientific value of Whale Valley. It is not just a spectacular fossil site. It is a place that exposes the process of evolution directly on the Earth's surface. Here you can witness one of the most important transitions in the history of life, how terrestrial mammals evolved step by step into modern cetaceans. When you physically stand next to these bones, the theory of evolution is no longer just a diagram in a textbook. It becomes something tangible and real. And this reality looks quite staggering. A marine behemoth 18 meters long with hind legs now lies in the arid center of the African interior. However, the Basilosaurus has another easily overlooked feature. Its body was extremely elongated. Despite reaching lengths of 18 meters, its body diameter was relatively slender. So much so that when scientists first discovered it, they initially thought it was a marine reptile rather than a mammal. In fact, the name Basilosaurus itself means king lizard. When it was first discovered in the mid-19th century, people had no idea it was actually a whale. Even after its true identity was confirmed later on, the name was never changed. So to this day, it remains a whale with a lizard-like name. This seemingly dramatic detail perfectly illustrates just how extraordinary it is. Even the scientists who initially studied it could not immediately figure out exactly what they had found. But the truly shocking aspect of Whale Valley is not just these paleontological fossils. It serves as direct proof of one fact. 45 million years ago, today's Sahara was not a desert. This area was once part of a warm bay of the ancient Tethys Ocean. Seawater once crashed against the shores here. Marine predators once prowled these waters. There was a real ocean floor here. And those dead creatures eventually settled on the seabed. In other words, today's Sahara is essentially an ancient ocean floor. This is not a metaphor, nor is it a poetic expression, but a geological fact that you can touch with your own hands. Yet, this is only the uppermost page of the archive. Geology can explain where these whale bones came from, but it cannot explain what happened afterwards. After the ocean receded, humans arrived here, and they soon began doing some even stranger things. In the late 1970s, archaeologist Fred Wendorf and archaeoastronomer J. McKim Malville discovered a megalithic site at Nabta Playa. There are stone circles, upright stone slabs, and megalithic markers aligned toward the horizon. When researchers began measuring the orientations of these stones, an unexpected result emerged. The positions pointed to by some of the stones highly coincided with the direction of the sunrise on the summer solstice. Other stone alignments corresponded to the positions of bright stars, even including the Orion region from about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Such precision is very hard to explain away as mere coincidence. The most famous ruin here is a stone circle only about 4 meters in diameter. From the outside, it looks so plain that it would hardly attract the attention of an ordinary person. But that is exactly what makes it so special. It does not rely on massive volume to draw the eye like the pyramids do. It just stands there quietly, silently overturning a long-held assumption. The ancient pastoralists of the Sahara did not lack complex astronomical observation capabilities. Some researchers even call Nabta Playa the Stonehenge of Africa. But this title is actually inaccurate because it predates Stonehenge by at least 1,000 years. This means that what we are looking at is not a replica made by some known civilization, but an astronomical observation tradition that emerged much earlier. And this is exactly where things get truly interesting. In the Nabta Playa region, people found more than just these stone structures. Archaeologists also discovered traces of seasonal camps, storage pits, animal bones, and remains that some researchers interpret as ritual burials of cattle. This point is crucial because it shows that the creators of these structures were not just passing nomads who randomly stuck a few rocks into the ground. They possessed a system and repetitive behavioral patterns. They knew how to connect the sky, water sources, seasonal changes, and survival. For the people living here, observing the sky was not some abstract hobby. It was a matter of life and death. Some of the megaliths weigh hundreds of kilograms, with a few individual stones even approaching a ton. They not only had to be found, but also transported for miles and arranged according to rules that the entire community could understand. This was no longer an impromptu act, but a knowledge system passed down through generations. And it is precisely here that a larger question arises. How did people living in the Sahara 8,000 years ago acquire such precise astronomical knowledge? We are accustomed to associating complex astronomical observations with ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Maya civilization. Rarely would we imagine that a group of pastoralists living on the edge of a lake could achieve this as well. Later, the climate began to change. The Sahara gradually dried up, the water sources disappeared, and the people followed the water and left this place. Only these stones remained, still quietly standing there today, as if silently challenging our familiar picture of history. Because what we are about to see next will further illustrate that these people were not just observing the sky. The world they lived in had even surpassed what many people today imagine the Sahara to be. Deep in the heart of today's Sahara, there is a place called the Tassili Plateau. If translated from the language of the Tuareg people, its name means Plateau of Rivers. And for today's Sahara, this name sounds almost like a piece of irony, because thousands of years ago, this place was a completely different scene. Rivers once flowed through here, and vegetation once covered this land. Giraffes, elephants, hippos, and herds of wild buffalo once lived here. And these are not restored images based on some bold fantasy, because people carved all of this right into the rocks. And archaeologists have already here discovered over 15,000 rock paintings and engravings. This is one of the largest rock art complexes on Earth. These works span an incredibly long period of time. Everything from ancient hunting scenes to later pastoral life was recorded on the rocks. It is also here that people finally realized a profound truth. The Sahara turning into a desert is actually a very recent event. It is not recent in a geological sense, but recent on a human scale. It was recent enough that the people living here still had time to leave a record of their world on the rocks. The realism of some of these rock paintings is astonishing. The creators accurately depicted the muscle lines of the animals, the movement of their limbs while running, the tilt of their necks, and the shape of their feet. This detail is crucial because it almost entirely rules out the most convenient explanation. We cannot simply say these strange images look weird because the artists lacked skill. On the contrary, these people knew exactly how to draw. Because of this high level of skill, the highly unusual figures stand out as especially bizarre. In the 1950s, French researcher Henri Lot led a large expedition to the Tassili Plateau and proposed the famous roundhead period concept. In the rock art from this period, a large number of humanoid figures with abnormal proportions appeared. They possessed giant round heads and lacked clear facial features. Some of their body outlines even look like they are wearing a special type of suit. A few of these images reach several meters in height. The most famous piece depicts a figure with a giant round head and a slender body, while the human standing next to it looks as tiny as a dwarf. Lahote was deeply shocked by this scene at the time and called it the Great Martian God. Of course, modern academia does not accept this interpretation. However, the title itself reveals an important fact. Even highly experienced researchers struggled to find the right words to describe these images when they first saw them. More cautious contemporary explanations suggest they represent religious rituals, symbolic figures, mythological creatures, or just a unique artistic style. Any of these explanations could be valid. The problem is that there is an undeniable detail here. The creators of these paintings could clearly depict real-life animals with extreme accuracy. This proves that the issue was not their technical ability, So why did these specific humanoid figures take on such extraordinary forms? Why does it seem as though the creators intentionally wanted to express the presence of beings that were not entirely human? There is another noteworthy phenomenon. According to the assessments of some researchers, the era to which these roundhead figures belong might be even older than the realistic pastoral scenes that followed. In other words, the very first things to appear on the rocks were these mysterious figures with giant round heads and peculiar body proportions. The familiar scenes of hunting, herding, and daily life only appeared later. This does not prove any mystical theories, but it certainly makes the explanation of it merely being a special painting style feel much less satisfying. The significance of the Tassili Plateau to the history of the Sahara is quite similar to the geological significance of Whale Valley. It tells us that in the exact location where this desert lies today, there was once not only a green world, but also a rich visual culture, a collective memory, and images that remain extremely difficult to fully explain even today. And then the story shifts. From this point forward, the Sahara is no longer just a biological and artistic archive. It begins to reveal the traces left behind by a massive cataclysm. Near the border of Egypt and Libya in the Great Sand Sea region, people discovered an incredibly unique material known as Libyan desert glass. These glass fragments are a transparent golden yellow, while some carry a faint green tint. They are scattered among the sand dunes and gravel, looking as if someone had just dropped them there recently. Some of the fragments even weigh several kilograms. But in reality, they have existed for tens of millions of years. This fact elevates them from a beautiful geological spectacle into one of the most profound mysteries of the Sahara. The primary component of Libyan desert glass is almost pure silica, with a purity level reaching around 98%. Forming this type of glass usually requires a sudden temperature spike, reaching 1600 to 2000 degrees Celsius. Temperatures this high typically only occur during extreme events. Examples include massive meteorite impacts, ultra-powerful airbursts, or exceptionally rare surface melting phenomena. But here is the problem. If a colossal impact event generated such extreme heat, it should have left behind a massive impact crater. Yet to this day, this crater has never been found. For nearly a century, people have been searching for it, without any success. This missing crater is precisely what makes the whole mystery so incredibly stubborn. If we could just find clear remnants of an impact, this problem might have been solved long ago. But the reality is the exact opposite. Here we have a glass distribution area stretching across thousands of square kilometers. We have evidence of the extreme high temperatures required to form the glass, and we have microscopic traces supporting an impact origin. But to this day, no single theory can completely explain all of this. Some scientists believe it might have come from a massive high-altitude explosion. Others suggest an ancient meteorite impact did occur, but the crater was completely erased by extensive weathering and erosion over time. Other researchers point out that some characteristics of this glass do not perfectly match typical impact glass. The longer the debate continues, the more people begin to feel a certain way. Perhaps what we are looking at are the remnants of an ancient event that we still cannot fully reconstruct. Later on, with the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the entire story became even more intriguing. Among the funerary jewelry of the young pharaoh, archaeologists found a famous scarab beetle ornament. It was set right in the center of an ornate pectoral necklace. Subsequent analysis revealed that this scarab was carved precisely out of Libyan desert glass. This means that the ancient Egyptians not only knew of this material, but also ventured deep into the desert to find it. They viewed it as an incredibly precious treasure, precious enough to be used in royal jewelry. This fact alone speaks volumes. Ancient peoples discovered this mysterious glass of unknown origin, crossed hundreds of kilometers of desert to bring it back to the center of their civilization, and crafted it into an accessory dedicated to the pharaoh. And in their eyes, the pharaoh was practically equal to a god. Some studies suggest that even before the time of Tutankhamun, certain nomadic groups might have already been using this glass as a special material. But the scarab is what truly made it world famous. People suddenly realized that one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in Egypt was directly connected to a geological mystery that still has no clear answer today. So the question remains: what exactly was the event that released enough energy above or on the surface of the Sahara to melt such a massive area of sand? Was it a meteorite, a high-altitude airburst, or some kind of chain reaction that we have yet to fully understand? To this day, there is still no definitive answer. And exactly because of this, the next location feels exceptionally special. We are no longer just discussing geology here. We are touching upon one of the most famous lost civilization legends in human history. If you look down at the Mauritania region in the Western Sahara, from a satellite perspective, you will quickly notice a massive concentric structure. It looks as if someone used a giant compass to carve ring after ring into the surface of the Earth. Rings envelop other rings, expanding outward layer by layer, forming a structure roughly 50 kilometers in diameter. Because its shape is so incredibly striking, pilots, astronauts, and mapmakers have noticed its existence since the early days of spaceflight. This is the famous Richat Structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. Geologists generally believe its formation is related to geological uplift combined with long-term differential erosion. Rock layers of varying hardness underwent millions of years of wind and water erosion, eventually forming the unique concentric landscape we see today. From a geological perspective, this explanation makes perfect sense. But things are not quite that simple. The Richat Structure possesses a characteristic that very few geological sites have. It shares an astonishing overlap with one of the most famous legends of a lost civilization in human history. We are talking about Atlantis. In the dialogues Timaeus and Critias by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis is described as a giant city featuring a concentric structure. It had a central island surrounded by alternating rings of land and waterways, flanked by a vast plain on the outside, and located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Some researchers suggest that if you convert the dimensions recorded in the texts using certain historical scales, there is even a resemblance between those measurements and the actual size of the Richat Structure. It is important to clarify that this viewpoint is not the mainstream consensus in academia. The vast majority of researchers do not believe the Richat Structure is Atlantis, but this is exactly why the topic remains so highly debated. Proponents argue that there are simply too many hard-to-ignore similarities between the two. The ringed structures are alike, the sizes are comparable, and it is located west of the Strait of Gibraltar. There is a vast plain surrounding it, and even its overall visual morphology corresponds to some degree with Plato's descriptions. More importantly, to this day, the scientific community has not found another location that matches these characteristics as closely. For this reason, the Richat Structure continues to be pulled into discussions about Atlantis. What is even more fascinating is the thought that if this legend truly connects to a real physical location, then the location of its appearance might not be the deep ocean as people imagine, but rather deep within today's Sahara. And when we recall the things mentioned earlier, the ancient ocean, the ancient rivers, the ancient green world, this idea no longer seems as unfathomable as it initially sounded. Because we now know the Sahara was not always a desert. During the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, this region possessed lakes, rivers, and a much more humid climate. Therefore, the idea that a large-scale social system once existed here no longer sounds entirely like science fiction. What is even more fascinating is that geological studies discovered traces of freshwater sediments inside the Richat Structure. This means there was once water here, and specifically fresh water, which is the exact resource a large settlement would need to survive. Coincidentally, when Plato described Atlantis, he specifically mentioned rivers and springs. This correlation makes the whole story increasingly intriguing. Of course, these coincidences do not prove that the Richat structure is Atlantis, but perhaps that is not the real issue here. What is truly worth considering is why a landform of such scale, such morphology, and located in such a unique position shares so many overlapping traits with an ancient legend. If some myths truly preserve actual geographical memories, then have we been too quick to dismiss too many ancient legends? However, even the Richat structure is not the most surprising discovery in this archive, because up next is a civilization that has long been pushed out of the public historical view, and the ruins it left behind include an entire complex of pyramids. The Nubian Desert in Sudan. If a person has never heard of Meroe, their first reaction upon seeing it is usually the same: absolute cognitive dissonance. Because what you see are pyramids. Lots and lots of pyramids. Over 250 pyramids have been discovered here, a number that actually exceeds the surviving pyramids in Egypt. This fact alone is enough to completely overturn many people's impressions of ancient African civilizations. In the public consciousness, African history always seems to come to an abrupt halt near the borders of Egypt. The existence of Meroe shatters this exact notion. Meroe was once the capital of the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful Nubian civilization that had close ties with Egypt but can absolutely not be viewed merely as an Egyptian vassal. More importantly, during the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, the Kushite rulers even conquered Egypt and established the 25th dynasty of Egypt. In other words, these people, who are almost entirely ignored in popular culture, not only built their own pyramids, but even served as Egyptian pharaohs for a time. Based on this fact alone, they should have been a major chapter in any ancient civilization curriculum. Yet the reality is quite different. The pyramids of Meroe have distinct differences from Egyptian pyramids. They are narrower, taller in proportion, have much steeper slopes, and usually feature small offering temples built right next to them. The overall impression is not one of simple imitation, but rather a developmental tradition with its own independent architectural language and belief system. Yet it was also here that one of the most brutal acts of vandalism in archaeological history took place. In 1834, the Italian explorer Giuseppe Ferlini arrived here in search of treasure. He literally blew the tops off the pyramids and smashed his way inside, using the most barbaric methods. A massive number of structures were destroyed, and many ruins were permanently damaged. Some of the unearthed artifacts made their way into European museums, while many more items disappeared into history forever. But even after enduring such destruction, Meroe continues to present historians with new questions. Within the tombs and cultural remains, researchers have found extensive evidence of long-distance trade. These discoveries indicate that they not only maintained contact with Egypt and the Mediterranean world, but also had exchanges with the Red Sea coast, the Arabian Peninsula, and possibly even regions as far away as India. This means Meroe was not some remote frontier. It acted more like a vital hub in the ancient world trade network. Yet the most headache-inducing problem is not any of these things. It is the Meroitic script. Researchers have successfully deciphered the phonetic system of this writing, but they still cannot truly comprehend its meaning. Every page of documentation feels as though it is covered by a thin layer of fog. You know it is speaking, but you simply cannot understand what it is trying to express. And this is exactly the current reality of a vast amount of Meroitic heritage. At the same time, geophysical surveys have discovered anomalous underground structures beneath some of the pyramids and buildings. Cavities, hidden chambers, sealed spaces, and unknown formations are continuously being recorded. Yet many of these remain unopened and unexplained. This implies that beneath the Nubian pyramids, undiscovered data likely still lies buried. And these future discoveries might not just change our understanding of the Kingdom of Kush, they could potentially impact our entire perception of ancient Northeast African history. Because of this, the fact that mainstream historical narratives still treat Meroe as a marginal footnote seems somewhat absurd, because it is not a footnote at all. It is an entire world, a world we still cannot fully read today. However, the most unsettling secret preserved by the Sahara might not lie among these towering pyramids, but rather in the places that look like they hold absolutely nothing. Because the final location is not some famous ruin. It is more of a feeling that makes us realize we might be far from understanding the true scale of this desert. The Ahaggar Plateau is a massive mountainous region located deep in the heart of the Sahara. For centuries, it has primarily been traversed by the Tuareg people. At first glance, there seems to be nothing here but silent rocks and emptiness. There are no pyramids, no temples, and no popular tourist routes. But it is precisely this blankness that makes it so exceptionally daunting, because history loves to hide important things in places that appear to have nothing at all. Scattered across the Ahaggar Plateau and its surrounding areas is a vast number of stone structures. There are circular shapes, straight lines, elongated enclosures, rectangular ruins, and even some earth and stone mounds that appear to have been clearly planned. Some of these structures have also been found in other parts of the Sahara, and researchers typically associate them with burials, livestock enclosures, or ritual sites. But there are other ruins that simply cannot be neatly categorized into any known classification. Their layouts are overly geometric, and their orientations seem to carry specific meaning. The strangest part is that some of these structures only reveal their complete forms when viewed from the air. Thus, a familiar phenomenon appears once again. Whether it is the Nazca lines, the massive geoglyphs on the Central Asian steppes, or the colossal stone monuments of the Arabian Peninsula, they all share similar characteristics. When standing on the ground, they look like nothing more than scattered rocks. But when the viewing angle is elevated, the chaos suddenly transforms into order. For modern archaeology, this is no longer an unfamiliar phenomenon. But for ordinary people, one question remains unavoidable. From what perspective did these builders plan these structures? A high vantage point on a nearby hillside? Some symbolic map that only they understood? Or is it that we simply have not yet understood the true purpose of these structures? The most unsettling thing about Ahaggar is not just the ruins themselves. The legends of the local Tuareg people frequently mention ancient camps, mysterious locations, and traces of human activity that predate modern nomadic routes. Of course, oral traditions cannot replace archaeological evidence, but very often, they might be the final echoes left behind by some lost history. When archaeological ruins, natural landscapes, and local memories all point in the same direction, ignoring them becomes increasingly difficult. The Ahaggar Plateau itself is also worthy of special attention. It is not just a highland region. Its highest peak reaches an elevation of 2,918 meters, making it the highest point in all of Algeria. Even more surprising is that satellite surveys conducted between 2019 and 2022 recorded over 800 stone structures in this area, the vast majority of which lack both formal descriptions and clear dating. What does this mean? It means we are not dealing with just one or two weird rocks, but an entire layer of historical remains that has yet to be systematically studied. The problem is that systematic research here remains extremely limited. The reasons are not particularly mysterious. Difficult transportation, unstable situations, lack of funding, and an excessively vast area. These practical factors collectively cause large swaths of the Sahara to remain stuck in the stage of just being discovered, recorded, and briefly described. There is still a very long way to go before any truly in-depth research can happen. For those who love to fantasize, this sounds like an invitation to infinite possibilities. But for the field of history, it actually feels more like a profound regret. Because even today, in the 21st century, there are still massive regions on Earth where our most honest answer remains a single sentence. We have almost no idea what happened there. 7 completely different pieces of evidence. Ancient whales with hind legs. Astronomical observation sites older than Stonehenge. Rock art archives documenting a green Sahara. mysterious glass with an origin that remains highly debated. A ring-shaped landform, showing a shocking overlap with ancient legends. A civilization with pyramids and an undeciphered script. And stone ruins whose full scope can only be seen from high in the sky. Viewed individually, each of these sites is already extraordinary enough. But when placed together, they accomplish one specific thing. They strip away our excuse to simply view the Sahara as just a desert. Because it is not a blank void, it acts much more like a colossal archive buried beneath a sea of sand. As more and more dust-covered traces are rediscovered, people are beginning to develop a growing sensation. Perhaps we are running late to a massive conversation about the past. This conversation has been ongoing for thousands of years. We just never took the time to seriously listen. The Sahara has never been silent. It is just that for a very long time, we mistakenly assumed it was an empty wasteland. And just like that, we've leafed through most mysterious files of the world's largest desert. Building on everything we've just explored, the greatest lesson the Sahara teaches us isn't found in megaliths or whale bones. It's a lesson in humility. Humility in the face of the relentless flow of time. Human knowledge is like a tiny island in an ocean of the unknown. What we consider absolute truth today could easily be rewritten tomorrow by a single artifact buried deep beneath the sand. We must never stop asking questions, and we must never hastily close the door on curiosity. Science and history are not about memorizing a finished book. They are about having the courage to turn to a new page, to get closer to the truth. Everything I've shared with you today on TIAN Science is based on my own research, synthesis, and personal analysis. And just like any scientific hypothesis, my views could be absolutely right, or they could be entirely wrong. The ultimate truth is still sleeping beneath those golden dunes. But what do you guys think? What's your take on these 7 locations? Are these ancient legends fact or fiction? Is the historical timeline we've always trusted hiding something from us? I really want to hear your diverse perspectives. Drop your thoughts down below so we can debate, analyze, and piece together the answers as a community. And before we wrap up this video, the universe is vast, and our Earth is incredibly diverse. I'm super curious. Where are all of you tuning in from right now? What city or country are you watching TIAN Science from? Let me know your location in the comments. Who knows, you might just find a fellow science enthusiast living right in your neighborhood. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very final seconds. I'll see you all down in the comments. Have an energized and amazing day.